Let's get into the segment we've really been enjoying over the last few weeks. We call it What's Up, Doc. It's where we spend some time with our friends at MercyHealth, and we get to ask them all sorts of questions, and every one of these has been an educational experience.
It's been great.
For us in particular. Mm-hmm. We learned about midwifery last week.
We learned midwifery was a word.
Yeah,
right.
Because we'd have screwed that up otherwise,
yes.
But Amber was nice enough to get us all the way through all that, so we got through that one, and now we're going to talk a little tech this morning. I've been looking forward to spending some time with MercyHealth VP of Population Health and Value-Based Care. And we're going to ask him what that means as well. And his name is Ladd Udy. Ladd, good morning to you.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on. First off, that on a business card, Value-Based Care and Population Health, I'm impressed by the VP part immediately, but what's the rest of that mean?
Sure. Value-based care is basically a new way of paying for care. Usually the folks who are paying for healthcare are either employers or insurance companies, and traditionally they have paid through a service or a system called fee-for-service, where they pay for every individual little thing that occurs. And now they're experimenting with different ways of paying providers that align better with overall outcomes of care, such as quality measures, et cetera. So part of my role is to help ensure that we're ready for that and that we can deliver on those quality outcomes for our patients.
Outstanding. We're looking forward to learning about some new technologies, telehealth and telemedicine services at MercyHealth. And first off, what's the difference between telehealth and telemedicine?
That's a very good question, Riley. Unfortunately, those terms are used very interchangeably depending on who you're talking to and which organization is offering the service. They do technically have different definitions, but usually what they're referring to there is using technology to interact with your physician as opposed to being there in person, most commonly through a video visit such as FaceTime or Messenger, or some of those commonly used apps that we use to interact with family and friends.
In the last couple months, I'm sure you guys had this in place before the pandemic happened, but I'm sure it's been used quite a bit more in the last couple months. What have you guys found that you fixed? What's different now in your plan than it was a couple months ago?
Well, it has grown significantly. It was always part of our plan that we figured it would move towards more remote type of care for certain things. Obviously, you can't do everything via telemedicine, but there are certain things that you can, a surprising amount, actually. And so it was something that we were investing in and working towards, and it had a little bit slow uptick, but it advanced by 5 or 10 years in a matter of a month with the COVID situation, because things were developing really quickly. We didn't know exactly what was safe, what we needed to do to keep people safe, and so we were largely, for a while, we're telling people to stay away while we figured things out. And that wasn't just MercyHealth, that was the industry as a whole. And now that we figured out safety precautions, it's safe to come back, we know what we need to do. But in the meantime, people started using telemedicine. We stood that up and ramped it up pretty quickly. And now we're finding that many providers and patients actually like that, maybe even better than they did coming in. It's more convenient and saves them time.
It's the same sort of theory behind in wartime. Technological advances jump forward because they're needed immediately and all this. It's not a physical shooting war, but it's a war against the coronavirus and other things, forcing you guys to move and act on the run and get things up and going and change them as each day indicates they need to.
Right. I would agree with that. It's kind of forced the issue. It was always something that was on the radar and we were working towards. It just advanced it very quickly.
The corporate world has kind of realized they don't need as much real estate as they used to think they did with all the teleconferencing and commuting going on. When we get back to normal, if we do sometime soon, same thing going to happen in the medical profession? Or are doctors going to realize we don't need this much office space? There'll be a consolidation of just real estate in the medical community?
You know, that's a good question. It's hard to determine at this point what that new normal is. I think we're all kind of anxious to know and wondering what that might be, but it's certainly something that's on the radar. It is a possibility that some of that space could be consolidated, but there are certain things that you'll still need to go and see a provider for, obviously. In some cases, they need to put their hands on you and feel things and make sure that something feels right, or they need to listen to it. For example, you can't cast a broken arm or a broken leg via telemedicine. So there's a surprising amount you can do remotely, but there certainly will always still be a need for person-to-person, face-to-face care as well. So we're trying to find that right balance as we move forward to meet patient demands as well as the provider's expectations.
Yeah, you don't want to run over to YouTube to learn how to deal with that compound fracture on a DIY site, I think.
Ideally not. I wouldn't suggest it.
Speaking of, when should somebody use a telehealth visit over an in-person visit?
Sure. Right now, we're in a situation where certain folks are more vulnerable than others to the COVID-19 and being exposed to it. And so anybody who's not comfortable right now can certainly call their provider and inquire about whether or not their visit is appropriate. Your provider will be able to tell you whether or not it's something you need to actually come in for. So some common situations that are often seen via telemedicine are things like rashes or allergies or pink eye. Urinary tract infection. This time of year we see quite a bit of allergy. We also see quite a few insect bites, even things like headaches, but particularly right now, COVID symptoms. If you have a dry cough, a fever, shortness of breath, that kind of thing, this is a good first step to determine, do you need to be tested, or what are the next steps. But going forward, certain conditions like diabetes or heart failure, things that people suffer with over the long term, this is a great tool for those check-ins that you need to have, say, monthly or quarterly, to check in with your provider where you may not necessarily need a physical hands-on exam.
Kind of, if you wouldn't mind pulling back the curtain for us a little bit, is there anybody kind of, before this happened, was there anybody kind of nervous or didn't want to do, I'm talking about doctors, didn't want to do the telecommunication, but now that they're seeing it's actually working, they're for it. Have we changed some minds in the medical profession the last couple of months?
I think we have. I think it was kind of a mixed bag before. In the pre-COVID era, there were some who were really on board and saw a lot of potential with it. There are others who felt like, I don't know, we'll see how this goes, and others who felt like they wouldn't be able to provide an adequate medical examination. And there are still certain cases where they can't, where you do still need to be there in person. But we've seen a lot of folks come around, and in fact, I spoke to one provider recently who was surprised at how actually intimate that visit felt, because it's kind of the new version of a house call. You can see the patient's environment and where they're living, which has a lot to do with your health sometimes. And in some cases, they've even asked the patient to go, show me your fridge, show me your medicine cabinet, and so they can see the bottles there, because sometimes people don't bring those things with them, or the provider isn't able to otherwise see it. So it's been interesting to see what we've learned both as a health system, as providers, and as well as patients learning how it works.
We talked cost a little bit earlier. Telemedicine visit, telehealth visit, going to run the same as an in-person? One going to be more, one going to be less? How does that work?
Sure. That's a situation we're keeping our eye on closely. Right now, there's a lot of flexibility given the COVID situation. Most insurance companies, which, as I mentioned before, is usually who pays for the majority of care, most of them are being really flexible right now. And so for most patients, you have to obviously check with your individual insurance, but most patients will pay about the same, either the same copay. In some cases, insurance companies are waiving copays completely for telemedicine visits, so it might actually be cheaper. Or in other cases, if you're accessing an on-demand service as opposed to, you can have a telemedicine visit with your regular provider, but you can also have an on-demand urgent care type of visit. For most people, the copay is, or the cost is about the same or less than what they would pay for an on-site urgent care visit.
If I have if I have a telemedicine appointment set up, do I need anything? Usually I go to the doctor, we do the vitals right away, blood pressure, temperature. Am I expected to record any of that myself at home?
In some cases, yeah, or they'll just they'll get what they can get via telephone. And in our case, when you have a clinic visit booked, then you'll speak with usually the rooming nurse will call you and ask you a series of questions. Some of it we're not able to do, but otherwise, if you do have a scale available, they may ask you to weigh yourself, for example, or ask you if you've noticed any changes. So they adapt on the fly based on the situation.
I would imagine technologically down the line as well, some mechanism will be put into place to try to grab those readings remotely.
Yes, that's a great point. In fact, that's one of those things that is really developing pretty frequently, or rapidly, I should say, with the advent of different kinds of apps where people will enter their, for example, patients with diabetes might use an app where they are entering their blood sugar values daily, or tracking their activity, and some of that can be transmitted to the provider remotely. So lots of interesting tools like that being developed right now to help alert providers to potential problems so they can proactively reach out to the patient.
Ladd, pretty safe to say that when COVID-19 is behind us, telemedicine and telehealth will not be behind us.
Yes, that's our assumption as well. We're not sure exactly what it will look like, but given the response we've had from providers and patients, it's proven to be a very good option, at least for quite a few different things. It's a really kind of an exciting future.
It seems like it, and a landmark difference from you look back 20 years ago and how you did things, and look what we're doing with them now and where it's going. It's a pretty cool path. He's Ladd Udy. He is a VP of Population Health and Value-Based Care with MercyHealth, and he was kind enough to carve time out of his day to hang around with us a little bit. Ladd, we really appreciate it. We appreciate the expertise and your time as well.
Thanks, Riley. I appreciate you having me.